Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Friday, everyone. This is Marty Kaiser with our Friday episode of Real Estate Tidbits. Today's going to be an interesting show. If you remember, I for those of you that saw my social media post, I kind of gave a little teaser on some serious topics that we're going to talk about today, in addition to some lighter topics, but the serious topics are going to get more priority today. To start on the lighter topics, we had Thursday night NFL football last night. Our Florida team, the Miami Dolphins, who looks like it's going to be a long season for them. They lost to the Buffalo Bills last night, 31-21, so they dropped to 0-3. The Bills are at 3-0. And it appears if this trend continues with the Dolphins, they may end up having to terminate their coach, Mike McDaniel. It's a shame because he's a very astute guy, especially when it comes to offensive play calling, but he just doesn't seem to be able to get the best out of his players. And if you can't do that, you're not going to be a successful coach in the NFL. Sunday, we've got a bunch of great games coming up. So for football fans, I'm sure it'll be a great weekend for them. That's all I'm going to talk about on kind of a casual note. I wanted to chat today on a bunch of issues that are tremendously bothering me. They don't directly impact real estate as much, but I think they're more important than real estate. And it's just kind of the United States is changing direction in our philosophies, our morals, citizens' rights, and things of that nature. So I wanted to go over that today. And I would hope that everybody would give careful listen to what I'm going to say. I'm sure not everybody's going to agree with me. And I certainly welcome people to respond on whether they agree or don't agree, and if they don't agree, what they don't agree with, and how they feel it's best suited to the citizens in terms of how our country operates. So I'm going to start off with kind of a headline, if you can picture a headline on the screen. Our country is more and more getting with what I call the ends justify the means mentality. What are the ramifications of that? So what I basically mean by that is, with our leadership, regardless of what party they're on, if we like what I call their big ticket items, meaning that you like their immigration policy, you like their policy on abortion, you like their policy on crime, things of that nature, then you're willing to overlook everything else that they do if you know that the other things they do you find distasteful. And our country's never been founded on to that degree. I mean, we're a capitalistic society. So in a capitalistic society, money is always at the forefront of things. And frequently, unless you're a very, what I call moral person, money can cloud many people's judgments. So just keep that premise in mind as I go through some of the topics that I want to talk about. As we talked about last Friday, it was a very somber podcast. We had the tragic assassination of Charlie Kirk, and that was, just an abomination. Doesn't matter whether you agreed with Charlie Kirk's viewpoints or not, because obviously he had a philosophy that was on one extreme of the spectrum, but he always conducted himself in a gentlemanly fashion and encouraged debate from people that didn't agree with his philosophies. So I wanted to start off with, and I looked these up myself, so these are not my interpretation, definitions. What is the definition of free speech? Well, in the U.S. Constitution, free speech is defined by the First Amendment, which states that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. This means the government is prohibited from interfering with your expression, but this right is not absolute and does not apply to private entities. The protected speech is broad, encompassing spoken words, writing, broadcasting, symbolic actions like wearing armbands, and other forms of expression, allowing individuals to share ideas and opinions without fear of government punishment. And this has been in existence since the formation of the United States. So the Constitution, I believe, was written in 1776. So we're nearing our 250th anniversary. And we've had ups and downs in the country. You know, we've had leaders of different philosophies, but one thing that has remained pretty constant is that people have the right to express their own opinions. You know, I would say the only caveat I would put on that myself is if people start making threats, endorsing violence, things of that nature, then that goes beyond freedom of speech. And you have to take action against individuals that do that if you feel that that's a big threat to people. You just can't let people, you know, put everybody else in fear and threaten violence and things of that nature. And this controversy has all started because of Jimmy Kimmel's situation. ABC suspended Jimmy Kimmel because of some comments that he made. Now, I wanted to read to you the comments that he made and see if you think they were endorsing violence, they were threats. They rose to the level that somebody should have been censored. And it's not a question of whether you agreed with what he said. Personally, I don't watch late night comedic shows, whether it's Jimmy Kimmel, whether it's Jimmy Fallon. And there's a third one whose name escapes me. And then we have Seth Meyers. Just because I'm not up that late usually. And I just have never been a big late night talk show viewer. But here's what Jimmy Kimmel said that got him pulled off the air. And I'll kind of read to you. In his opening monologue on Monday, and of course, as you know, Jimmy Kimmel has frequently been a critic of President Trump. He accused the MAGA gang, M-A-G-A gang, of trying to score political points from Kirk's murder, saying they were quick to blame the left before much was known about the shooter's motives. So that's basically what he said. Oh, you might think that was a stupid comment or whatever your opinion is, but it didn't denigrate Charlie Kirk or his family in any way. It didn't imply any type of threats. It didn't endorse any violence. It was just him making a comment that was probably partly to try to be funny and partly because what had happened since the assassination, starting in the Oval Office, President Trump has continued through yesterday to make what I would call comments that could incite violence by saying these are the left-wing crazies. He's pretty much said with 100% certainty that not only was this guy a left-winger, but these were the extremists in our country, and they've got to put a stop to the left-wing extremists. They're causing all the problems in the country. And at this point, and there's no evidence that's been shared by any of the law enforcement entities that he is in that category. He could be, but the only thing that looks to be, so to speak, is that he was an individual who increasingly, according to his family, had gotten more political in his behavior over the past couple of years and committed this atrocity. But in my opinion, and this is my opinion now, President Trump's comments do nothing but foster this antagonistic, violent rhetoric that has become increasing in this country. And We've always had opposing viewpoints, and obviously we had multiple assassinations in the 1960s of all liberal Democratic leaders, and we've had miscellaneous shootings and assassinations in the last 10 to 15 years, but they've been pretty mixed. There's been just as many people that you would characterize Democrats as you would characterize Republicans that got shot, starting with the tragic shooting of Congresswoman Gabby Gifford in 2011, I believe. So to make these comments that President Trump continues to make, being the supreme leader of our country, the person that has the bully pulpit, to me is a big contributor to the political climate that we're seeing. And to me, his comments are far worse than Jimmy Kimmel's comments, but yet he never gets criticized by anybody of his own party. There's such fear of him from Republicans that the behavior that he continues to exert from not a policy level, just his behavior that most people would consider unacceptable, there's just never any pushback from people in his own party. I know if you were in a regular job, whether you were a clerk at a department store, whether you were an executive in a corporation, whether you were a real estate broker like myself, if you made these absolutely extreme comments, you probably would lose your job. But yet, President Trump doesn't even get any kind of pushback from people of his own party. They just endorse it, even though you hear behind the scenes they feel it's detrimental to our country. They don't have the fortitude and the integrity to say anything negative about them. Now, I want you to contrast Jimmy Kimmel's comments. I'm going to read these one more time. He accused the MAGA gang of trying to score political points from Kirk's murder, saying they were quick to blame the left before much was known about the shooter's motives. Contrast that to what happened earlier this week. Fox host Brian Kilmeade recently apologized for an extremely callous remark where he said that homeless people who experience mental illness and refuse treatment should be executed. Now think about that. He's categorizing a group of people, if they personify certain characteristics, they should be executed. Now, that is perpetuating violent behavior. At the very least, it's disgusting commentary. Brian Kilmeade is what I would call a quasi-newsman. He's a Fox News host, but I guess he's part of the network that's able to espouse his own opinions. But to me, he has a certain, responsibility to think before he speaks. And Fox News did nothing to him at this point. He didn't get suspended. He didn't get censored. He apologized. Okay, well, it's great that he apologized, but keep in mind that Jimmy Kimmel, and I'm not defending Jimmy Kimmel, because like I said, I'm not a fan of the late night comedian shows. He was suspended / possibly fired. So I'm sure if the ABC News management group had said, Jimmy, you created a firestorm, we need you to go on the next night and we need you to apologize for your comments, he probably would have done so. He may not have thought it was necessary, but he would have done so. And if he had been allowed to remain on his show, there wouldn't have been all these comments about free speech and the erosion of free speech. Now, this is just the latest in a series of events, because I'll mention the Kimmel situation, and then I'll mention some other things. The head of the FCC, when he was talking about ABC and Kimmel, basically said if ABC didn't do the right thing, the FCC would come after them, and he made threats. It was unequivocal threats, and it isn't the first time that this gentleman of the FCC has made these threats. Well, that's not the job of the FCC, and for them to make threats and kind of injecting their viewpoints into how our media operates, to me, is completely opposite of the way the United States is supposed to operate. We've always had certain guidelines on the broadcasts of the major networks. In other words, they can't really swear, and there's a few other things they can't do. And that's why people like Howard Stern went on satellite radio or cable, because they don't have the same guidelines. They can pretty much say whatever they want to on there. They're not under the same jurisdiction that the networks are. But for the FCC to get involved is, very fearful. I'll combine that with Donald Trump has made numerous comments since he was reelected about going after his enemies, going after these people that have comments that are criticizing Donald Trump that are on our media, whether it's print media or whether it's on the television networks. He came out the other day and was talking about how Jimmy Kimmel has done nothing but rip him, and that I think he said over 97% of Jimmy Kimmel's comments are negative about himself. And then he went on to say that in the swing states, where, they also air Jimmy Kimmel's show, that all these states voted for Trump. So that kind of is a reason why Jimmy Kimmel shouldn't be making these comments, among other things, and that, he was going to go after all these late night hosts that are critical of him, that are costing their networks a bunch of money, and that are, anti-American, etc. That's not the president's jurisdiction. He's trying to stifle free speech. A free country, you're allowed to criticize your leaders. And for those of you that have been around for a while, political satire has been part of our recent history, at least for the last 50 years. If you listen to these different late night talk shows, Jack Paar and Johnny Carson, David Letterman, Dick Cavett, and the more contemporary talk shows, they always make fun about the political leaders, specifically the presidents. And it doesn't matter whether they're Democrat or Republican. That's been a typical thing. Sometimes they're quite funny, and sometimes maybe you don't think they're as funny. But David Letterman was on TV for, 25 or 30 years. So he was on during Democratic presidents and Republican presidents. And he was always critical. It was nothing new, and nobody... a lot of times the presidents didn't like it because nobody likes being made fun of, but nobody threatened to censor the guy, take him off the air, whatever the case may be. And we're getting to a point now where that's not the case. And the scary thing about it is, when I started off this podcast with the ends justify the means mentality, a lot of the supporters of Trump are willing to overlook all these things as long as they like his big ticket items. But they don't realize that everybody's rights are being eroded. It doesn't matter whether you're a conservative, a liberal, a Democrat, or a Republican. I myself, I've said many times on my podcast, that I'm an independent. So I don't really have a preference to party. I look at candidates. And I can tell you my own voting over the past, in the 2016 election, the 2020 election, and the 2024 election, all three elections that President Trump ran in, I wasn't voting because I liked any of the candidates. I was voting for the one that I disliked the least. I thought all the candidates had issues, and it was just a question of who I thought would cause less damage for the country, or who would govern the country, for lack of a better term, more from try to be fair as opposed to taking everything personal. You know, when you're a person that has a lot of authority, and the President of the United States has the most authority of any elected official that I'm aware of, you're supposed to be above petty stuff, and you're supposed to be above criticism. People that have a lot of visibility and a lot of power, they're always going to get criticized. And there's an old saying, if you can't stand the heat, then get out of the kitchen. But unfortunately, that's not the case in the United States right now. So I mentioned yesterday when I was doing a quick social media post about we're getting to a point now where it's all about money. Like capitalism has gotten to, we're seeing the worst of capitalism. And why did Jimmy Kimmel get censored? And why did he get, whether it's suspended indefinitely or fired by ABC News? Because they're in the midst of a big merger acquisition that would be, multiple amounts of money. I don't know if it's in the millions or billions, but it's a huge deal. And so they're scared to death that if they oppose President Trump and or the FCC, that this merger would get rejected, costing them a ton of money. So they're willing to let their principles and free speech principles take a back seat to profit. And if the media is going to take a back seat to profits, then we're going to lose all rights of free speech. And this same thing happened a few months ago with CBS, and they were in the midst of a big business merger and stuff, and they ended up, I believe they ended up paying a big fine because Donald Trump had sued them, or it was ABC, excuse me. They paid Donald Trump a big fine because he sued them about comments that George Stephanopoulos had made. So a lot of the legal scholars felt that ABC could have prevailed in this case. You can argue why they paid this big settlement, but to me, it was kind of like quiet blackmail. They paid this so that they wouldn't get a lot of adversarial interactions with the government that could hurt their business model. They might end up having licensing issues. It was intimidation, basically. When you're unlimited power, you can intimidate people with threats, whether they're open threats or implied threats. So that opened a Pandora's box, which a lot of people felt was going to happen. And now this Jimmy Kimmel thing is the latest to what that Pandora's box was. And then I'm going to pivot a little bit to what I said yesterday. Now Florida is going to endorse open carry to the point where people can carry a gun on the street. So I guess my only question is this. I tell you, open carry scares me to no end. Who really thinks that people having more guns and more guns visible is going to reduce gun violence? Does that make sense? I don't think so. Gun violence continues to accelerate, and we're talking about the Charlie Kirk assassination, and how did this gentleman get all these guns and ammunition and stuff? He must have had some kind of mental illness, because to commit an atrocity like that, you can't be completely sane. And it seemed like there's no end to what extreme gun advocates want in terms of the permissive nature. They want zero controls over guns. That was not how our Second Amendment was designed. I'm not going to give a constitutional lesson on what took place in the United States in 1776 and how things are different today. But I don't believe that was the intent of our framers of our Constitution. Now, I want people to think about two things when it relates to guns and open carry and such. Gun sales are big business. They're a multi-billion-dollar business. So the big gun manufacturers and the big gun retailers, they make millions and billions on gun sales. So, of course, they want unlimited gun permission. They don't want any controls over guns whatsoever. And the NRA exerts a lot of pressure. They give a lot of political donations to politicians. They give a lot of endorsements to politicians who favor gun liberalization. And they threaten politicians that if you don't endorse this, we're going to endorse the candidate running against you. So these politicians are beholden to the gun lobbies for the reasons that I mentioned. And the only time they'll say anything negative is if somebody that has similar viewpoints to them gets shot, except that their only response in all these cases are, it's disgusting and our guns and prayers are with the victims and the victim's family. But that's not stopping gun violence at all. They just continue and they continue multiplying. I think most people, if you ask them truthfully, they feel a lot less safe in our society than they used to. And that can be attributed to a lot of reasons, but guns are at the top of that. So my comment yesterday, too, was capitalism versus gun control. It seems like people will sell their soul if money's involved. And that's unfortunate because I don't think initially that our country was founded on that. So some things that I want people to think about after I finish my comments today. Are you okay with the government telling you how to think, act, and speak? What is okay to be on the airwaves and print media, etc., if the government does not agree? Do you think it's okay for the government to come after the entity or individual unless that entity or individual changes their contents, opinions, and speech? Now, to me, that's a no-brainer. We can't let the government do that. But we're quickly morphing into that. Now, I wanted to share one last thing with you. What is authoritarianism? What is the definition of authoritarianism? I'll just read something brief that I saw. An authoritarian government is a political system characterized by the consolidation of power in a single leader or a small elite with limited political freedoms and limited accountability to the public. Authoritarian regimes suppress dissent and uphold the political status quo, often eroding democratic institutions from within. The term is sometimes contrasted with totalitarianism, which attempts to control every aspect of public and private life. And if you think about what's happening in this country, we're exactly on that path. The government is exerting more and more control. They're saying what they think should be said, what shouldn't be said, what the media should talk about, what the media should put in print media, and then if the media doesn't do this, they're going to go after the media. And then think about regimes that most people in the United States felt over the years were abhorrent. Joseph Stalin of Russia in World War II, Vladimir Putin right now, which I think it's pretty much agreed by most people that he encompasses the worst of authoritarianism in terms of dissent. That well-known dissenter of a few years ago got poisoned, ended up dying in jail. I don't remember the gentleman's name in Russia. But they're known for, killing dissenters in various ways. Even when the dissenters migrate out of the country, They get poison gas or other grotesque techniques to silence these people. Probably the most famous dictator and murderer was Adolf Hitler. He was able to get people to agree that the government of Germany was not working in their best interest, and systematically took over the media and eliminated dissent. If you dissented with him, you were jailed or murdered. And he was responsible for millions of people getting executed just because they were of a different religion than Adolf Hitler thought was proper. So we're on that path, and I'm not being, in my opinion, crying wolf. I think the evidence is clear that if we continue down this road, it does not bode well for the United States. And unfortunately, we have what I call three groups of people in this country. We have people that are extremes on the left, we have people that are extremes on the right, and then we have the majority of people somewhere in the middle. They might be middle left, they might be middle right, or they might be middle. I myself consider myself moderate, and I try to be, as I've mentioned before, I'm a pragmatic moderate. So I try to look at the situation and the politician, and I agree with people that I feel embody those characteristics, regardless of their political affiliation. And if I felt that a Democrat was the best candidate, I'd vote for them. If I felt the Republican was the best candidate, I would vote for them. You know, and for example, I'll give you, in 2008, John McCain ran for president against Barack Obama. And Barack Obama was a relatively unknown senator from Illinois who had been in office, I think, about 2 years. And his credentials on paper showed a lot less experience than John McCain. And John McCain was considered an heroic American, somebody that voiced his opinion, somebody that was a straight shooter. He was conservative, but he was consistent, listened to other people's points of views, and voted his conscience. And I was going to vote for John McCain, for example, in 2008. But I ended up changing at the last minute. Now, why did I change? Not because I was comfortable with Barack Obama's experience, but because John McCain was influenced by party leaders because he was losing in the polls to appoint Sarah Palin as his vice presidential candidate. And as you know, John McCain was a somewhat older candidate at that time. And if something had happened to him and he was the president, then Sarah Palin would have become the new president of the United States. And I felt strongly that she embodied characteristics that I just was totally uncomfortable with. I felt she had too many extreme viewpoints. I felt that she was not knowledgeable about world events. I thought she was tremendously unqualified. And in my lifetime, I thought she was the worst person that had ever been appointed to be a vice president. And I'm going back, let's say, from the mid-'70s to now as who I thought was the worst candidate. And I felt so strongly about her lack of credentials and how our country would be at risk if, God forbid, something had happened to John McCain, that I reluctantly voted for Barack Obama because I thought, again, he was the least unfavorable when I factored in all the variables. So I keep a completely open mind, and I would like people that listen to give some thought to that, because for the majority of people who are moderates, by going along passively with this, you're giving implicit endorsement that you're okay with our rights being eroded as long as you don't think it's directly affecting you. Like, it's not affecting your bank account. It's not affecting your job per se. But it indirectly is, and it'll more affect your kids, your grandkids. It's just a really bad precedent. And once we go past a certain level of losing our rights, we're not going to get them back. So that's all for today. I welcome your feedback. Everybody have a great weekend. Stay hydrated. And this is Marty Kaiser out.